الرحمن الرحيم وأصلي وأسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very important topic to discuss today regarding the strengthening of the integration and emergence of Africa, especially in light of the recently signed African Continental Free Trade Area. I would like especially the young Africans with us today to pay close attention, because maybe, inshallah, in the future, you might be one of the negotiators of these agreements. Let me say a few words about the present economic situation in Africa, very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time. Since the turn of the millennium, Africa has experienced steady and unprecedented economic growth. However, growth itself is not enough. Poverty continues for people across the continent, especially in the sub-Saharan region. Unemployment and inequality have remained high. The rural population and the urban poor, as well as women and youth, have not benefited from economic growth. African policymakers realize that for the benefits of growth to be shared by all, there needs to be a structural transformation of the economy with increased shares of manufacturing and agro-related industry in national investment, output, and trade. Today, Africa has exceptional opportunities for industrialization. In the next few decades, Africa will become the youngest and the most populous continent in the world. Industrialization, diversification, and job creation in Africa, however, cannot happen without continental economic integration. At the present time, Africa is a patchwork of regulations and tariffs, and trade between countries has suffered greatly. Trade among African countries account for only 7% of the continent's GDP, and its over-reliance, as it has always been the case, on commodities for extra-regional trade makes it dangerously exposed to commodity price shocks. Intra-African trade accounts for only 18% of total African trade. That's trade between the different African countries. While in Europe, internal trade is 69%, and in the Americas, it's 59%. Trade from Africa to the rest of the world averaged only $760 billion in current prices for the period 2015 to 2017, compared to $4.1 billion from Europe, and $5.1 billion from America, and $6.8 billion in Asia. Africa has already been divided into 8 separate free trade areas and custom unions, each with different regulations. Unfortunately, with the possible exception of East African Community and Southern African Development Community, most of the 8 RECs, regional economic communities, have struggled to yield results necessary to spur substantial economic growth. That's where this new agreement comes in. The recent signing of the historic Agreement for an African Continental Free Trade Area, ACFTA, by all members of the African states except Eritrea, because there is a state of war going on, it creates an opportunity for inclusive and sustainable economic development, moving away from structural stagnation and commodity-based economies. The ACFTA agreement will create the world's largest single and integrated market of goods and services in terms of countries since the creation of the World Trade Organization, the WTO, in 1994, and it will also create a customs union that will enable free movement of capital, business, and travelers. The ACFTA will bring together all members of the African Union, covering a market of more than 1.2 billion people and a combined gross domestic product of more than $3.4 trillion. By 2030, Africa may emerge as a $2.5 trillion potential market for household consumption and a $4.2 trillion for business-to-business consumption. The IMF sees ACFTA as a potential game changer, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa estimates that the ACFTA's implementation could double intra-African trade by 2030. ACFTA has therefore the potential to make concrete impact on the lives of ordinary citizens across the continent. How did we get there? Just a few words as how to the ACFTA came about. The 18th ordinary session of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the African Union, held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in January 2012, adopted a decision to establish a continental free trade area by 2017. At the 2015 African Union Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, the summit agreed to start negotiations. This began a series of negotiating sessions which took for 4 years after that. In March 2018, at the 10th extraordinary session of the African Union of the ACFTA, 3 separate agreements were signed, very important agreements. First, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Second, the Kigali Declaration. And third, the Protocol of Free Movement of Persons, which seeks to establish a visa-free zone within the ACFTA countries and support the creation of the African Union passport, a first for the continent of Africa. The agreement establishing the ACFTA entered into force on May 30, 2019 for the countries that has deposited instrument of ratification, because first you have to sign, but then you have to ratify it. That means the parliament has to agree on it. For those that have ratified it, the ACFTA is in full force. And the start of trading under the ACFTA agreement will begin on July 1st, 2020. However, there are a lot of challenges facing the free trade agreement. Will it be fully implemented? How to deal with the overlapping memberships? Will there be winners and losers? For sure there will be, as a result of this agreement, etc. We have a group of experts and very qualified people, panelists, who are going to help us untangle these questions. And I'm going to ask them to make it as simple as possible so the audience will understand the full meaning of this agreement. And then we will open the door. I'll ask them a few questions. I will let them first, each one of them, I will introduce them. Let them just briefly, 2-3 minutes to 4 minutes, tell us their perspective of the agreement. And then I'll ask them a few questions. Then it will be your turn to ask some questions. First, I have to my right Dr. Joy Kategenkwa. She is the Regional Strategic Advisor to Assistant Ambassador and Director for the Regional Bureau Africa at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. She is an international trade and development law and policy specialist. She is one of the architects of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So if there is any problem with the agreement, she's to blame. Having led technical teams in designing the draft legal negotiating instruments for the ACFTA. Madame, few words, s'il vous plaît.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for such an introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for the Amadeus Institute for the invitation. And I'm energized by seeing all these young people in the room. And so at some point, I hope when we finish this session, you can be inspired, not just to negotiate agreements in the future, but to start to think about business deals, entrepreneurship prospects that can help you tap opportunities in Senegal, in Ghana, in Uganda, where I'm from, thanks to the ACFTA. What is the perspective of the CFTA? For me, it's really the strongest demonstration right now of multilateralism globally. At a time when on trade integration, many are looking inward, Africa has come out very strong, saying we will do this and we'll do it together. So the African Continental Free Trade Area is really that African promise, that idea that Africa can, that idea that ambitions we set for ourselves in 1991 to create an African economic community through the Abuja Treaty have been fast-tracked to move to this point where we have 29 ratifications. We have an agreement whose speed has entered into force in such a timely manner that gets those involved at the World Trade Organization staring and thinking, how did they do it? We have a promise to create jobs. We have a promise to boost incomes. We have a promise to create opportunities for you, Africa's youth, and for women. What does the agreement do? It really sets in motion a dismantling of barriers to intra-African trade. They told us earlier intra-African trade is 18%. This is impressive when we look at 2020, where we are right now, and also knowing that we started at about 10% in 2012, but it shadows, it pales in comparison when you think about EU's 69%, for example. And so what the ACFTA does is really tackle those problems that make it difficult for Uganda's goods to go to Senegal, makes it difficult for Uganda's services suppliers to reach Ghana, tackling those obstacles to intra-African trade. It does this through a phase-down approach. We'll aim for 90% at the start, moving on to 97% ultimately. And then in the services sector, where we focus on 5, so transport, finance, tourism, business services, and all these sort of architecture-type services, communications. What this really means is that we stand at the opportunity of really unleashing a torrent of opportunities, a torrent of markets across Africa. And so what it does really is create this instrument that makes the African industrialization drive that much more possible. Because it's difficult to do that when each time you try to cross the border, you're faced with a huge sort of wall of tariffs. And so I'm very excited about what all of this means, and I do hope that through the ACFTA, we can start to really look at the Africa we want. We can start to create the Africa we want. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Joy, for this beautiful introduction. To your right, we have my dear friend, Dr. Ned Devani. He is an author and professor and investment specialist. He is a graduate finance professor at Harvard University, and he is also the chair of the Masters of Science in Finance and Master of Science in Risk Management and Insurance in New England College of Business and Finance. He has extensive experience in academia and industry in the field of finance and risk management. Dr. Gandevani spent 20 years of his career as a trader and hedge fund manager right here in New York City, specializing in quant systems, macro strategies, and the utilization of different asset classes to maximize performance. He has authored 4 books and investment and more than 40 research papers and essays. He is an active investment banker and investment specialist with interest in global economic progress and startups. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Kevin.
Thank you so much. Thank you, my dear friend, Dr. Abu Sarur. Delighted to be here, part of a conversation, and my special thanks to the dear organizer of the program, Amadeus and IDA. So I do have a little different perspective on economic integration of African continent. So I just want to give you a little of, kind of a short intro, and then provide you a proposal, some, food for thoughts. So economic integration indeed provides the opportunity to scale the resources and be more efficient in providing the costly and expensive infrastructure to neighboring countries in Africa. Of course, it provides economies of scale and economies of scope. Getting goods to move more freely across the continent matters for regional integration. When trade flows are faster and more cost-effective, businesses and consumers in the regions benefit. Trade creates economic activities, which in turn impacts on people's livelihood and incomes to accelerate Africa's development. Trade links from Africa to the world are more direct and efficient than the trade between neighboring regions due to infrastructure gaps or capital costs and non-tariff barriers. Facilitating Africa's trade is part of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, which propagates better soft infrastructure from electronic customs system to one-stop border posts that can make a significant difference for intra-regional traders through streamlining the queues of trucks at borders to supporting informal cross-border traders to go through the official channels. African integration has been one of the goals of many organizations, including the African Union, which aims to create a common market. Indeed, Africa could become the largest free trade zone through the cultivation of intra-African trade. For that, a wide array of projects need to be implemented to include transport, infrastructure, telecommunication, industrialization, production, etc. Last year, on March 2018, 44 African nations came together and signed the Continental Free Trade Agreement, CFTA. Under the continent-wide agreement, nations commit to cut tariffs to 90% of goods with the aim of increasing intra-Africa trade. The historic document creates the largest free trade zone since the creation of the WTO in 1995. Africa's intra-regional trade lies well below that of other regions. In 2016, intra-Africa exports made up 18% of total exports compared to 59% and 69% for intra-Asia and intra-Europe exports, respectively. The figures for imports are similar. There have been slight improvements in the past 10 years, though as the share of African countries export within the continent have slightly increased. The share of imports, on the other hand, have remained stagnant, despite the increase in total income volume. However, due to non-tariff barriers, this is my point, due to non-tariff barriers like cultural, political, and social issues, the path to integration has been slow. In comparison, other regional economic pacts, such as Asia, has advanced, Africa has advanced much slower pace. There is a great deal of cultural and political barriers to integration. In other words, working on reducing tariffs, building roads and means of transportation for better mobility of goods and trade is necessary, but not sufficient. Case in point, Morocco has initiated projects for automobile development, agriculture, and offshore zone. It created growth, but not as desired. The ripple effect that can be observed on the job market is shy of expectations. The fact is, trade with other African countries is difficult and inefficient, mainly due to cultural and political barriers. Egypt, for example, refused to import Renault cars from Morocco. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done on eliminating non-tariff barriers between African sovereign nations. I propose more work and research to be done in developing country-based business hubs to utilize African youth. We talked about African youth all day, one of the greatest resources of the continent. A third of the world's population is under 20 years old, but some countries are younger than others. In around 40 African countries, over 50% of the population is under 20. Over 50% of the population is under 20. By contrast, in 30 richer countries, less than 20% of the population is under 20. We need to identify effective and efficient methods to train and lead African youth. Educational centers should be created to provide educational programs to increase their skill sets. The centers should offer mentorship and advice for entrepreneurs. To augment the work of educational centers, we should provide seed capitals for entrepreneurs and small businesses. So by developing their talents and niche, they provide sustainable business endeavors for African countries. Capital and financial growth promote knowledge and technology transfer and greater innovation. Today, I'd like to propose the creation of African Startup Ecosystem Project, which facilitates business hubs based on the country's core competencies for further discussions and research. The focus should be shifted towards the development of local and regional business hubs. It's much easier to attract investment capital. Governments are willing to expand funding for startups. And in the aggregate, policy actions to increase access to capital are correlated with greater levels of earlier stage funding in ecosystems. So for that, maybe 4 areas we can look into, and I will leave it for further discussion other times. The first one, institutional framework with the help of government policy. The second area is skills and education, creating proper programs. And then number 3, access to talent. Identify core competencies and niches of each country's populations. And finally, access to capital. Thank you so much. My pleasure.
To my left, we have the pleasure of having Mrs. Maggie Gu. She has more than 18 years of experience in the management of international affairs, excelling in public relations and crisis management, targeting the existing social, political, and economic problems that Africa is facing in the new era. Mrs. Gu proposed many creative, practical, and effective solutions. And because of that, she founded the Tomorrow Foundation, and I urge you to go online and see what it does. Ms. Gu, welcome. Please
okay, everyone can hear me?
Briefly, just an introduction, and then we will get to the questions.
Okay, so, and thank you for organize the 2 co-partners to organize this conference and give me a chance to be here. I come from Switzerland. My foundation is based in Geneva, and I have worked in United Nations as well in my past. And my foundation has been working in African topic and also the front field, and since my beginning of my career, 18 years. So we talk about African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I believe it is a solution because it's the strong engine for the structural transformation of African and regional integration. Why I say that? Because removing progressively tariff on the large variety of the goods will not work if there are no roads to convey those goods. If trucks drivers are blocked during hours at police checkpoints, if there is no factory to produce those goods, if there no an engineer to design those products, if farmers' production is stolen by armed groups, how it will happen? ACFTA. I saw it. I know it from the beginning because this topic has to be discussed in African Union for a very long time. Finally, they are here. But we will see so many uncertain difficulties. Some we already expected, some not. But we need to be patient to solve one by one. We know there's a long way to go, but we're already involved, even my foundation. And my foundation, for my opinion, we start already with the biggest US junior education foundation, also seven largest NGO in the world, to start African junior education in 15 countries already. We started a 3 years program because what we can do as NGO is to help the youth on the agriculture, manufacture service, all the economy sectors that's required for this trading agreement need trading people, talents, specialized skilled leaders. I can see through my foundation initiatives that African youth has so strong motivations, loves for them countries, and capacity to learn and progress. Of course, we have to have long-term vision and strong willings to do so because it's not easy all the African countries to rule and coordinate. While we see several countries in other continents of the world are going back to protectionism, and it's very encouraging to see that central topic of the convention in Africa shift those recent years from war and conflict to commerce and trade. It will be my great pleasure and honor to be part of this great change of human history level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brooke. Last but not least, we have our friend, Dr. Fred Olaili. He's a chief economist with the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where he leads economic research and policy initiatives aimed at making New York City the global model for inclusive growth and innovation. A research professor at the Sprott School of Business, Carleton University in Canada, he has taught strategy and international business in the MBA program and applied and theoretical economic classes at the University of Regina, Canada. Dr. Fred.
Thank you very much, the chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and special thanks to the Amadeus Institute, to Mr. Lagidi and all of the organizers. It's a great pleasure to be here. I do realize we are behind schedule, we are out of time, so I'm going to change my plan. Yeah, this is a technical topic, and I've written extensively on this. I was at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa about 2 years ago, and I did a major presentation on this. I have a paper on this topic, intra-African trade, which I can send to the organizers. So that being said, I do realize that the majority here, we have youth here, so I would like to really talk about integration of the continent, I would want the youth to look at it from this perspective. And this is a very short story. I was born and raised in Nigeria, before I moved to Canada for graduate school. And upon my sojourn in Canada, I looked back and imagined the number of countries that I had traveled in Africa before leaving, it was amazing. I had only traveled to 3 countries. But in Canada, because of the infrastructure, because of the regional integration and the connectivity, you could travel 6 hours, 7, 10 hours by road because of the integrated nature of that. We had uncles. But at the end of the day, the major opportunity that I think does exist is the ability to reduce the inefficiencies. So I was in Morocco. Now think about M-Pesa in Kenya. Look at how that is leading to a revolution in the financial technology space. You go to Lagos, Nigeria, the startup economy, the venture capital economy is skyrocketing. And then you go down to South Africa, the quality of infrastructure. So that does tell us that all of the different regions and countries, they do have different. The fact that the African situation is peculiar, and I did not overflock that. A lot of the speakers there, already alluded to that fact. Take, for instance, the Chinese miracle. So how did it happen? For a country to, in a space of 30 years, they moved over 600 million people out of poverty to the middle class, a poor, isolated form. Major ingredients. There's rapid urbanization happening across Africa. Household consumption is on the rise. Business spending is huge. And last but not least is the youth bulge, okay? 2/3. So that's about 67% of the population in Africa. They are youth, under 35. Short introduction by saying that as chief economist for New York City, this is the center of the universe. This is the Big Apple, and this is the global model for inclusive growth, for innovation, for what have you. But as someone who also left Nigeria for Canada, I taught in 2 universities. I was chief economist in government for over a decade in Canada. So also realize that the future of Africa is bright. Because when you talk about inclusive growth, it's all about growing the size of the pie and ensuring that other people share from it. Like the African Development President recently said. He said nobody eats GDP. So at the end of the day, it's about ensuring that vulnerable groups, women, youth, are able to partake in the gains of with an economy over $3 trillion. It's going to be massive. And you add that to the digital revolution. Look at what technology is doing. In college economics, you are taught that to develop, you would have to go through subsistence agriculture to manufacturing before you can get to where you are going. But with technology, the leapfrog is the missing link that we have been looking for so long. So Africa's time is there, and I look forward to debating this further. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. You know, when you are in the second panel, you run the risk of the first panel eating up some of your time, so we'll have to live with that. I was initially planning to have 2 questions for each of the panelists. I'm going to combine the 2 questions into one and ask them to please not spend more than 3 to 4 minutes. That's 15 minutes, so we can have the time for our dear friends to having some closing remarks. Dr. Joy Kategekwa, what measures and policies should be taken to ensure that the agreement is fully implemented and that it will address the economic integration of the African continent? And also, if you can touch on briefly on what is the role of the regional economic communities in the context of the ACFTA deal. In 3 to 4 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll start with the last question. What is the role of the RECs? The RECs are the regional economic communities. So for many in the room who are here, it would be sort of like, for example, the Arab Union, the UMA, so to speak. For us in the East African side, it would be EAC. For those in the West, it would be ECOWAS. So they're the building blocks. Their role is the building blocks. If you think about it as a house, the minute you start to talk about integration, you're intrinsically talking about a cross-border dimension. And so they're really that building block that will take us to where we are now at the continental level. And because they're building blocks, I think the journey was framed initially as understanding that there would be a stop towards a bigger end. So think about your regional integration in your region, but think about that as being a stop. You sort of experiment with a free trade area, and then you move on to make it continental. And now that we've moved and reached to that point of the continental free trade area, the ACFTA, the role of the regional economic communities is really to celebrate this success, not to see it as competition, because they've been part and parcel of the design, the structure, the architecture of the ACFTA, but to think about how do we bring to life the promise of the ACFTA, knowing in fact that we're always a stop on the journey. And so in a sense, that takes me also to the second question, because the role of the RECs is pretty much in rolling out those sorts of policies and strategies that will bring to life the fruition of the ACFTA. And so I'd like to make the case that the role of the RECs is really about focusing on, one, finalizing the negotiation credibly, because someone told us we're aiming only for 90% initially. I think the whole process would break down, fall apart, if in fact the 10% that's left out are those critical tariff lines for intra-African trade. And so in a sense, it's for the RECs to really contribute to this process of being a proper good building block by ensuring that this 90% that is the context of the ACFTA are those tariff lines that are really utilizable between Uganda and Morocco, for example. The second one is to say, well, how do we utilize? And so then you move into this productive capacities agenda. The ACFTA is a development blueprint. It's an industrialization blueprint. It is really this idea of what is my niche as Morocco in the ACFTA. How do we create regional value chains? So the RECs would really bring about these regional strategies for implementation of the ACFTA to understand how it is that regions can position themselves for full benefit. It's important to bear in mind that much of the intra-African trade right now is actually within regions, within UMA, within EAC, within SADC, 52%, for example. And yet when we try to sort of go up to the continental level, we see the numbers dropping. This means that the first shoots of growth in intra-African trade will really be in the RECs. And for that to happen, the RECs must look at their mind frame as outside of negotiations and into productive capacities agenda. The third point I'd make is really this question of trade facilitation. We have to resolve all the challenges that the professor made, that the investment specialist made, to create a push around Africa where we tackle non-tariff barriers, where we facilitate trade. The final point is this question of the infrastructure of integration. Africa has been structured in terms of roads, networks, rails, around an infrastructure that takes out commodities. We need to find an infrastructure that connects Africa, the best people to know that are those closest to the markets. And so I'll close there by saying from negotiation mind frame to really a focus on utilization, which is the productive capacities agenda.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My next question is to Dr. Gandevani. The African business community is supposed to be a key beneficiary of this agreement. The ACFTA makes doing business in Africa, on the continent of Africa, easier and should bring, theoretically, should bring new investors to the table. You have already touched upon the hub ecosystem, so I would like to ask you, how do you think that investment flows and financing facilities will help with the integration objectives? In 3 minutes, please.
Absolutely. Thank you for the good question. Indeed, I do appreciate that amazing work has been done to process this economic integration by lowering tariffs and focusing on infrastructure projects. That should be done, but my point is that is not, is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So I propose that we focus, at least, some research should be done on African, startup ecosystem program. By doing so, we identify the core, competencies of each nation. We look at their comparative advantage. We look at their absolute advantage. Take a look at Lagos. Lagos is shining. Why is that? Because they have identified their key competencies, and therefore the flow of capital investment is rather easy. Capital looks for opportunity when they see, a nation or a city like Lagos is able to identify the area they can excel. They have much better comparative advantage compared to other nations or other regions. Capital will flow there. So my suggestion would be, let's go to each country, let's identify, using their youth generation, let's see what are their core competency, what is their talent, making sure we do have a proper system to be able to attract talents and identify those talents. Let's provide them, take them through educational programs so we can teach them proper skill set, and more important, let's create a flow of capital seeds, capital investment, so we can flourish their entrepreneurship talents. So that is all, within the, framework of this, African startup ecosystem. For example, maybe in another time, if we have more time, we'll discuss a little detail. The first step is for me to identify the deep tech startups within a country. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.
Dr. Gu, as we all know, well, the reality is that there will be winners and there will be losers in this trade agreement, as it has been the case for many other trade agreements in other continents. The African Union's role will be to ensure that shared prosperity is taking place in the continent. Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa account for over 50% of Africa's cumulative GDP, while its 6 sovereign island nations represent only 1%. Economies like Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Cote d'Ivoire, as well as South Africa and Kenya and Ethiopia, will definitely benefit from this agreement. While Chad, the Republic of Congo, and Zambia, they will not. They will be limited gains, and they will risk losing their competitive advantage. Nigeria has been reluctant to sign this agreement because its economy is heavily relying on oil exports, and they see very limited benefits in this agreement, but they have finally signed the agreement. South Africa's manufacturers will benefit a lot because of their manufacturing policy. Do you think that we should be afraid of the risks that the ACFTA would create imbalances in the continent?
African Continental Free Trade Agreement is set to include prevention and trade facilitation and transit and customer cooperation for all countries, pushing for the diversification and economies and over economic development. So there's at least 2 major changes I'm presenting in this topic. It's non-tariff barriers and debt management. Firstly, we talk about no tariff barriers infrastructures, regulations giving a favorite business environment, capital flows, customer procedures, people education and security. And we talk about better debt management. And some country, they have environment and they have regulation, they have law to attract business partner, not depending on owning debt of the state. International cooperation must realize, and in all the agreement for the investment has to be win-win principle. And we go back to the topic you had raised for me. We had to meet, indeed, some of African countries with advanced infrastructure, strict toward customer processes, political stabilities, and the favorite legal environment will benefit most from free trade agreement. Indeed, for sure. But the world is not perfectly balanced. There is no balance between even individuals as well at the beginning of our life. This make world and people varies. Africa is like a school class with 55 classmates. If everybody shares and learn together, it gives you better results than we do not talk to each other or not move towards each other. Would the 55 classmates all like wearing blue dress forever? Certainly not. But for the common mission and great target with shared goals and benefits over a certain period, like going to summer camp or award celebration ceremony. Yes, we do. We do work together. And in the end, we will be all winners.
Thank you so very much. Thank you very much. Dr. Fred, while most of the focus of the ACFTA has been on goods and services, it is imperative not to overlook the importance of services industry. As Africa's services exports grew more than 6 times faster than merchandise exports between 1998 and 2015. So what is your perspective on trade services? And also briefly, if you can touch on the implications of the ACFTA for inclusive growth in Africa. 2 to 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. I like the fact that Dr. Joy talked about the ACFTA being a vehicle. It's a framework, to help Africa to deliver, on the future for the youth and unborn generation. That being said, I think when we talk about the services economy, when we talk about inclusive growth, it is important to think critically, about the informal sector. The informal sector in Africa is huge. The Economist magazine puts it at about 40%. The African Development Bank says it's about 50%. So when you look at an underground economy that is that huge, there are so many inefficiencies, there are so many people who are underemployed, who do not have the opportunity, to really increase their productivity. Talking about the ACFTA being a vehicle, being a strategy, when you look at the global north, you see that they are already talking about so many issues. Look at the future of work. So one of the speakers talked about Nigeria being hesitant, in signing that agreement. But when the president was hesitant, a lot of trade policy analysts and experts dismissed some of the concerns. Because at the end of the day, the world is not going to wait for anybody. You are talking about artificial intelligence, you are talking about the fourth industrial revolution. So it is either you face it or you don't. Of course, there may be short-term pain, but at the end of the day, I think the informal sector is a major beneficiary, and particularly women. When you look at the informal sector in Africa, women constitute a huge proportion of players in that sector. And the International Labour Organization discusses all of the characteristics of the informal sector. Folks, they are not well paid, remunerations are not at par with people in the formal sector. Health conditions and benefits and what have you. And also, you can also talk about micro and small and medium-scale enterprises. There is a huge potential, for the entrepreneurial potential that can be unleashed. So to round up, I see the ACFTA as a vehicle, as a much-needed framework to help us think alike. Because now this has advanced beyond a free trade area or customs, we are talking about a single market, 3 trillion economy, Even investors who are coming to the continent would rather, want to play in a big market that is not faced with the issue of fragmentization, So in the final analysis, I think this is a unique opportunity that levels the playing ground and that enables players to understand that there is a lot of harmonization happening. One of the students asked a question the other time about circularity, the circular economy. That's an issue that is pervasive, in the advanced countries. People are already thinking about how to recycle waste to help achieve the SDGs. With the ACFTA, some of these issues can be discussed because then you can harmonize data. For folks who are very conversant with the North American data system, there's what we call NAICS, the North American Industry Classification System. All of the industry sectors, they are harmonized across the 3 countries. When you do research in Africa, you are trying to do planning or capacity building. Because of the different systems, some of these inefficiencies, they hamper the opportunities for development. So I'll leave it at that, but again, emphasize the fact that it's a framework. We have a number of other institutions, the African Development Bank, UNECA doing their thing, but for the umpteenth time, the ACFTA is our vehicle that enables Africa to operate in the mainstream of global commerce. For too long, Africa has been playing by the side. And with the digital revolution, with technology, a lot of entrepreneurs who can sit back there. You can be in Kigali. You can sit in Cairo, and do a whole lot and export your services to the other parts of the world. That's a major breakthrough here. Thank you.
In conclusion, ACFTA to dramatically change the fate of Africa and Africans. Negotiations, however, are the easy part. Implementation of the ACFTA is the real challenge. That means translating the agreement into national law and ensuring that all relevant government agencies are prepared and able to apply the required changes, and that they actually do. The fate of the ACFTA ultimately depends on African leaders following through on the high expectations they have set for the ACFTA. They must show leadership and commitment on implementing the ACFTA. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is here. It will change the political and economic geography of Africa forever. What was thought unthinkable has happened. It was the icon Nelson Mandela who said, "It always looks impossible until it is done." For African political, private sector, and intellectual leaderships, the call of duty is to ensure that this trajectory is irreversible. Now is the time for the young like you to know what Pan-Africanism means. I am not free until everyone is free. We must have the Africans we want in order to build the Africa we want. That is a free, prosperous, and peaceful Africa. Following the wonderful intervention of His Excellency Mr. Omar Hilali, Permanent Representative of Morocco at the United Nations, about the youth, I turn to you, youth of Africa. You are the reason for which we are here today. And I sincerely thank Amadeus and Ida for making this possible. You have to know that you are in a global competition. You are not competing just in your city or in your country. You are competing with the whole world. You have to start thinking out of the box. Fear should not be something that blocks you. Failure should not be something that stops you, as failure is only failure when it stops you to continue. I worked on many African countries, and I mentioned Sierra Leone. In most countries, when you say, "How are you doing?" people will respond, "Alhamdulillah, I'm doing fine, merci, je suis, ça va, etc." In Sierra Leone, when you ask them, they say, "Fall down and get up." I fall down and they get up. What a wonderful expression. They have faith and they are not scared of the future. Failure, you can fail and fail and fail and you will succeed. You have to start thinking of creating your own enterprises, creating companies, employing people. Don't look for the government to give you hands out or to employ you. Most of the technology that we use has been created by students like you in this country and others. Think of Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Uber, etc. They have all been created by students in a basement or in a garage. And look where they took us today. You have to start believing in yourself. And right here we have examples. We have Sibrahim with us. He could have decided to have a wonderful regular job with the government or the company, but he chose to go beyond. He created Amadeus, a wonderful do-thank organization. That gathers over 5,000 people in Tangier every year, contribute to the knowledge, contribute to research, and be an arm to the government, to the decision makers. We have Sibrahim Shabib. He could have decided to have a wonderful life between Morocco and Italy, but he is working on IDA, a wonderful organization that is getting us together. So believe in yourself. You owe this to yourself, you owe it to your families, you owe it to your country, Morocco, and you owe it to your continent, Africa. With that, I say thank you very much. God bless you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm him and Sir Abdul Rahman to have some closing remarks. And I think there is in the schedule some questions and answers for the students. We can take care of that as well. Okay, so yeah, let's have. I don't think we're going to have questions until they tell me stop, because there is the room. We have to leave the room at a certain time, and we have to be strict about that. We can take two questions.
So just I want to make one quick note, if you don't mind, regarding one of the questions they had early about secular economy. I don't understand what it is.
Okay, we'll
so
get to that. Yeah.
I just want to make sure we are not propagating wrong information.
Yes, yes.
There's nothing like secular economy.
Who is in line for the first question? Yes, I see you first in the middle, right there. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Give us your name and ask your question, please.
Bonjour. Good morning. My name is Mohammed, doctor on international legal law. I'm a lawyer in Marrakesh. I'm very proud to be part of this conference today. I would like to thank the Italian Diplomatic Academy and the Amadeus Institute for the effort that they have spent in order to bring us together here. My question is the following. Today, lately, Morocco, with the leadership of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, has opened a fund to finance projects and investments of Moroccan youth who want to create small and medium enterprises in Morocco. I wonder why we couldn't globalize this concept in Africa, because the particularity of this concept is that the interest rate is very low and the fund is very well funded. Would it be a good idea to spread this idea over Africa to encourage the African youth and to promote the African development? Thank you.
It's this idea of the greatness of young people. I think your point is really spot on. Great ideas in one country have to diffuse into the rest of the continent. Finance is a big issue, not just for youth, but also for women and so on and so forth. So I'd just say welcome, welcome, welcome. And I'd use this opportunity also to say that UNDP, which I work for, is also critically engaging in this space of supporting women and youth. So great idea, welcome. Thanks.
You would like a young lady to ask a question. You want to ask a question? A young lady? Yes, please, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Emergence from Sophia Institution for Education, Marrakesh, Morocco. First, I would like to thank the eminent members of the panels for the valued information they have provided us with. The United Nations Organization staff, Moroccan Paramount Commission to the United Nations, Amadeus Institute, and the Italian Diplomatic Academy for giving us, we, the youth of the world, the opportunity to be here in the United Nations. My question is, to what extent does economic growth in their way is achieved in industrial countries nowadays lead to a real global sustainable development? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have, before we answer your question, Dr. Fred is going to answer your question. We'd like a young lady to ask a question, please. Yes.
Dear Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Iban Siem. I am from Morocco, specifically from Marrakesh. I am gladly here to represent my own school, LRK. And I want to thank you, dear Excellency, for giving you the opportunity to voice their opinion. And my question is as follows. What extent do the investments of non-African countries on the development of this country? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Fred is going to answer the first question, and Dr. Ned will answer the second question because it deals with investment. And then we are done. Please, in 1 minute, please.
Okay, if I got it right, the question was about the relationship, between economic growth and the sustainable development goals, right, in the developed world. So I'll put it this way: the world over, there has been the realization that economic growth in itself, it's nothing if it is not equitably distributed, if people do not benefit from growth. And I'll use the model of capitalism, when you look at a lot of countries in the 80s, they embraced capitalism fully, and of course, that created prosperity. But because of the emphasis on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, we have, as citizens of the globe, we have realized that it is not just important to put all of the emphasis on GDP or growth. It is important to also look at other important elements.
Thank you so much.
How do you grow it? How do you take care of the environment in a sustainable way? So sustainability is very key.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ned, 1 minute, please.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the key element for growing GDP of a country is inviting FDI, foreign direct investment. The more countries able to provide policies to invite the foreign investment and capital coming to the country, the greater growth GDP will have. Look around all the countries. Look at Dubai as a good example. The reason Dubai or UAE is UAE because of a strong FDI. So if you are able to open up our capital market to foreign investors, making sure the government provides proper guarantees, then we'll have great growth.
Thank you very much. With that, I will, je vais céder la parole à Ibrahim.
With that, I'll give the floor to Mr. Ibrahim and Mr. Abdurrahman for closing remarks.
I would like to spend a couple of minutes to resume the working of today. We have been assisting to the different panelists, and it is clear that Africa needs more structures, needs more investments, capacity building, integration, and inclusive growth. In order to achieve this, we need more Africans, and we need more integrated educational system to create and consolidate the values, and with a systematic, interested approach to prepare the next leading generation in order to consolidate these values. So it appears evident to everybody, in order to have a good Africa, a best Africa, we need more Africans and a hub where they can define and conceive their own needs. Inspired by the College of Europe in Bruges and by the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, IDA, through its Moroccan office, is engaged in laying down the pillars and procedures for giving Africa the first African school for Africans. I would like to conclude by the secret of preparing the fundamental steps of a more complex building proceeding is to educate the people of the country, educate the people of the continent. Thank you very much, and I will allow my dear friend Brahim to conclude this very interesting and fruitful conversation. Thank you very much.
Merci Abdelrahman, très cher frère.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. Brothers and sisters, I have the honor to close the debate and the meeting today, which is rich and intense, which demonstrates the pertinence and the fairness of an Africa that is taken in charge of its own destiny. I am encouraged by seeing a majority of young Moroccan men and women, with a majority of women, of ladies. We are proud of you. You make us proud. And this is why we are working with our friends and partners from IDA to make sure that Morocco, each year in the United Nations, could come with a generational delegation of young ambassadors for their country and for their continent. It is a north-south initiative between a north-south initiative between an institution of Morocco and another one of Italy. So this is why I have 2 pins for Italy and Morocco. And this is important for our continent, Africa. I'm happy to announce that it conference has been very successful. We had several ambassadors who came to be with us, and a special envoy of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and the President of the General Assembly, and a certain number of experts, African and non-African, who are interested in the daily questions and issues of our continent. I believe that this is the second edition of our conference, and I believe that with the will of God, next year we will be here at the United Nations in New York to continue to face or to tackle these African Union challenges so that we can continue to think about Africa together. Very quickly, I would like to salute and thank very warmly the permanent mission of the Kingdom of Morocco at the United Nations for its unconditional support for the success of this event. I would like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Amar Hilal and also his entire team, and I would like to mention particularly Madame Majda Mouchou, who is present with us today and who deserves our applause. We talked about the African Union stability, attractiveness, and economic activities. In the last summit in Addis Ababa 10 days ago, the African Union has decided to create a think tank reserved and focused on peace and stability in the continent. The Amadeus Institute is one of the most important think tanks in the continent, is proud to offer all the support necessary to this think tank and to this initiative. The Amadeus Institute is proud to bring in a retreat a certain number of African think tanks to think together to create about the creation of in Africa under the leadership of the African Union. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your presence. I thank this youth for having given us the force and the strength to fight for our country and for our continent. Thank you very much, and may God bless you. Before we leave this room, we will have a family picture with all the youth and the delegates.